Imagine for a moment that you are hiring a structural engineer to build a bridge in your city.
Okay.
And you sit down with them, and they give you this, like, incredibly passionate, soaring speech about how this bridge is going to connect communities.
Right, a real visionary pitch.
Exactly. How it's going to usher in this era of unprecedented prosperity and, how it'll stand as a monument to modern engineering for centuries.
Sounds great so far.
It does. But then you ask for the blueprints. You ask for the load-bearing calculations.
As you should.
Right. And the engineer just weighs you off and says, don't worry about the math. Just trust my vision.
Yeah, I'm definitely not hiring that engineer.
No one would.
Yeah.
Because if you did and that bridge collapsed under the weight of, 10 cars, that engineer wouldn't just be fired.
No, they'd face criminal negligence charges.
They would literally go to prison. I mean, we demand rigorous mathematical accountability and personal liability for the people who build our physical infrastructure.
Right, the stakes are just too high.
And here's the crazy part. When we step into the voting booth to choose the people who build our societal infrastructure.
The people commanding armies and managing trillions in tax revenue.
Yes. The people dictating public health, we just completely abandon that standard.
We really do.
We hand over the keys based on the exact equivalent of a passionate speech about a bridge with zero structural math to back it up.
It is a really jarring contrast when you frame it exactly that way.
It is.
Because in almost every other sector of human interaction, especially those involving really high stakes, we rely on legally binding contracts,
Right.
verifiable metrics, severe penalties for malpractice. But political governance has just somehow remained completely insulated from all those mechanisms.
Completely insulated.
We operate under this system where the primary consequence for a catastrophic failure is basically just losing a popularity contest a few years down the line.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are opening up this fascinating document called the Peaceful World Manifesto version 1.0.
It's a really dense text.
It is, yeah. But specifically, we are putting a magnifying glass entirely on just one single section today.
Item 24.
Item 24. It is titled Responsibility of Power, and it introduces this concept that attempts to just completely rewrite the operating system of modern democracy.
They call it the SMART mandate.
The SMART mandate. So the goal today for us and for you listening is to unpack the sheer mechanics of this proposal.
And we should be clear, we're looking at this impartially.
Oh, absolutely, impartially. We're just looking at how this text suggests we take the vague, highly theatrical world of political campaigning and turn it into a rigid, verifiable, and legally binding architecture.
Yeah, and the text itself is, it's remarkably clinical. It really doesn't waste any time on partisan grievances.
Not at all.
It basically diagnoses our current political landscape as an era of promises without obligations.
Oof. Promises without obligations, that hits hard.
It does. And the fundamental argument of item 24 is that this era just simply has to end. To achieve that, the manifesto proposes reviving a very old political concept called the imperative mandate, but upgrading it for the 21st century.
Into the SMART mandate.
Exactly.
So let's actually pause on the historical context for a second before we get into the upgrade part. Because in modern democracies, we are entirely accustomed to something else completely.
The free mandate.
Right. We elect a representative, and once they take that oath of office, they are essentially free agents.
Pretty much.
Like, they can completely reverse their campaign promises the very next day, and we have absolutely no legal recourse to stop them. We basically just have to wait for the next election cycle.
Yeah, that is the literal definition of a free mandate.
Okay, so where does that even come from? Why did we agree to that?
Well, the philosophical defense of the free mandate usually traces back to, the 18th century. Edmund Burke famously articulated it.
Right, Burke.
The argument is basically that you aren't electing a robot to just blindly execute the whims of the crowd.
Yeah, you're electing a person.
Exactly, a human being. You are electing them for their judgment, their wisdom, and their ability to adapt to new information once they're actually in the room where the decisions are made.
Because they have access to intelligence and briefings that we don't.
Exactly. A free mandate theoretically allows a leader to make deeply unpopular but supposedly necessary decisions for the long-term good of the nation.
Insulated from the immediate outrage of the public.
Right. That's the defense of it anyway.
But the imperative mandate, which is what item 24 wants to bring back in a new form, that flips Burke's idea entirely, doesn't it?
It really does. Historically, an imperative mandate meant that a delegate was sent to an assembly with strict binding instructions from their constituents.
Like a checklist.
Basically.
Sure.
And if the delegate deviated from those instructions, their authority was instantly revoked.
Wow. Just instantly fired.
Yep. The problem, though, with the historical imperative mandate was its rigidity.
Oh, I can imagine.
I mean, in a complex, fast-moving world, if a delegate is rigidly bound to a set of instructions drafted, like 6 months ago.
Right before a crisis happens.
Exactly. They literally cannot negotiate, compromise, or react to an unforeseen crisis like a sudden war or a global economic collapse.
They'd be paralyzed.
Completely. They would have to go back to the voters for every single minor pivot.
Which sounds like a recipe for absolute bureaucratic paralysis. I mean, nothing would ever get done.
Nothing at all.
So if the historical imperative mandate is way too rigid and the current free mandate is essentially just a blank check with zero accountability,
Right.
how does the text of item 24 synthesize these two extremes? Like, how does this smart mandate actually thread that needle?
Well, the text redefines the nature of a political campaign entirely.
Okay.
Under a smart mandate, a campaign program is no longer legally classified as advertising or just, political rhetoric.
This is not just a commercial?
No, it becomes a set of verifiable obligations.
Yeah.
You have to think of it as a complex legal contract between the candidate and the electorate.
A literal contract. Okay.
The smart aspect implies that it doesn't try to micromanage every single vote or like the daily bureaucratic tasks the politician is going to face.
Because that would be the old rigid mandate.
Exactly. Instead, it focuses on the core promises, the fundamental reasons they were granted power in the first place.
I see.
The mandate establishes the destination and the key metrics of the journey, but it leaves the politician the operational freedom to navigate the daily traffic.
As long as they don't change the destination without asking.
Exactly. As long as the core verifiable obligations remain the North Star.
Okay, but the friction there has to be defining what constitutes a core promise versus a minor tactical pivot, right?
Yes, that is the tricky part, yes.
Let me push back on this framework with a hypothetical just to see how it works.
Sure, let's do it.
Let's say a leader campaigns on a smart mandate to aggressively reduce the national deficit over 4 years.
Okay,
That is their core verifiable obligation. It's written in the contract.
got it.
But then, year 2 of their term, a massive global pandemic hits.
Oh, a total black swan event.
Right. Supply chains collapse, unemployment spikes, and the only way to prevent a total societal meltdown is to pass a massive stimulus package.
Which absolutely explodes the deficit.
Exactly. Now, under our current free mandate, the leader just passes the stimulus and explains it to the voters later.
And hopes they understand.
Right. But under a smart mandate, they are legally bound not to increase the deficit.
Yeah.
So does the smart mandate force a leader to choose between literally saving the country or breaking their legal contract and getting fired?
It's a great question. And the manifesto anticipates this exact tension by focusing on the legal architecture of the mandate itself.
Okay, so there isn't a skate hatch.
Sort of.
Wow.
If a black swan event fundamentally alters the reality in which the contract was signed, the politician cannot just unilaterally decide to tear up a contract and do whatever they want.
Like they do now.
Right. In corporate law, this is similar to a force majeure clause.
An act of God clause.
Exactly. The smart mandate would require the leader to formally declare that the original mandate is unachievable due to unforeseen circumstances.
Oh, so they have to openly admit it's void.
Yes. And then they would likely have to seek immediate, direct legitimation for a new course of action.
They have to go back to the shareholders, the citizens.
Present the new reality, present the new verifiable model for the stimulus package, and ask for a revised mandate.
So they can't just quietly abandon the promise.
No, absolutely not. They have to publicly acknowledge the breach and formally request an amendment to the contract.
Wow, that's a huge psychological shift.
It is. And if they don't, if they simply pivot and violate the key points without that formal democratic legitimation, they trigger responsibility procedures.
They get fired.
Essentially, yes. The text is demanding that we stop treating politicians as sovereigns who rule us and start treating them as contractors we have hired for a specific job.
That contractor analogy is perfect. I mean, if the scope of the job changes massively, the contractor doesn't just start building a different house.
No, They consult the client.
Right. They say, hey, we found asbestos. It's going to cost more. Do you approve?
Exactly.
Which naturally forces us to ask how we define these promises in the first place.
That's the real meat of item 24.
Because it's easy to track a promise like, I will build a bridge. It is physical. It's either there or it isn't.
Right.
But political promises are notoriously slippery. They are practically designed to sound profound while committing to absolutely nothing.
Oh, they're entirely engineered that way.
Which leads right into the practical principles outlined in item 24, starting with measurability.
Yes. The manifesto dictates that under a smart mandate, promises must be translated into concrete indicators and deadlines.
No more vague timelines.
None.
Yeah.
The text explicitly states that raspliv chorhe formulirovki, vague formulations, are considered completely invalid as obligations.
Wait, invalid, so you literally couldn't even put them in the campaign platform.
Exactly. This alone would decimate, like, 90% of modern political discourse.
It's the death of the slogan.
It really is.
Think about the campaigns we see every single cycle. I will restore greatness. I will fight for working families. I will build a stronger economy.
All meaningless, legally speaking.
Completely. Because those phrases are psychologically engineered to make you, the listener, project your own personal desires onto the candidate.
They are emotional hooks.
But logically, legally, they're ghosts. You cannot audit greatness.
No, you can't.
You cannot verify fighting for families. What does that even mean on a spreadsheet?
It means nothing. If a candidate brings those slogans to a smart mandate system, the system just rejects them as invalid.
So what replaces the slogan? What are they actually allowed to say?
To replace the slogan, the text insists on the implementation of evidence-based policy.
Okay, buzzword alert. What does that mean in this context?
It mandates that decisions must rely on data, verifiable models, and public argumentation.
Verifiable models. Let's dissect that phrase because I feel like that is the operational core of this whole new system.
It is. So when a politician proposes a policy, let's say a really significant tax cut.
A classic campaign promise.
Exactly. They aren't allowed to just stand at a podium and claim it will magically pay for itself through economic growth.
Right, the old trickle-down speech.
Under this manifesto, they have to present the actual mathematical model they are using to make that specific claim.
And crucially, that model becomes public property.
Yes, it's subject to public peer review.
Wow.
By making the model public, independent economists, opposing political factions, and even just civic organizations can test the assumptions within that model.
They can look at the variables.
Exactly. They can ask, does this model assume a totally unrealistic GDP growth rate?
Does it ignore the cost of inflation?
Does it account for global supply chain bottlenecks?
And if the model is mathematically flawed, the policy is essentially discredited before it ever goes into effect.
Right. The debate shifts entirely from attacking the candidate's personal character to attacking the candidate's math.
Just imagine how radically that alters the landscape of, like, a primetime political debate.
It would be unrecognizable.
Instead of two candidates standing at podiums, trading rehearsed zingers and emotional appeal.
And just talking over each other?
Yeah. It would look more like a rigorous academic defense. Or maybe a corporate board of directors meeting.
Yeah, a candidate puts up a data projection, and the moderator, or the opposing candidate, points out that their model fails to account for a projected dip in manufacturing.
You are no longer electing the person who speaks the best.
Right.
You are electing the person whose data holds up to extreme stress testing.
The text refers to this as public argumentation. It implies a civic sphere where the primary currency is no longer charisma, but empirical evidence.
But, and I'm sure you listening are already thinking this data can be manipulated.
Oh, heavily manipulated.
Right. If the government is the entity funding the research and publishing the statistics, they have an inherent incentive to ensure the data flatters their policies.
Of course they do.
We see that constantly. The government promises to lower the unemployment rate.
Right.
And magically, a year later, unemployment drops.
Incredible timing, usually right before an election.
Always. But when you look under the hood, you realize they didn't actually create more jobs.
They just changed the definition of who counts as unemployed.
Exactly. They excluded people who stopped looking for work. They graded their own homework, gave themselves an A, and used it as a talking point for re-election.
This is exactly why item 24 embeds a strict requirement for independent verification of key indicators right into its framework.
Independent verification.
Yes. A smart mandate simply cannot function if the executive branch controls the measuring stick.
Right. That defeats the whole purpose.
There must be auditing bodies that are structurally and financially completely decoupled from the political power they are auditing.
But man, the logistics of that are daunting. How do you genuinely insulate an auditing body from the most powerful people in a country? I mean, even Supreme Court justices who have lifetime appointments are inherently political in their origins.
True, but the manifesto doesn't prescribe the exact constitutional amendments needed. It leaves room for implementation. But we can look at existing analogs.
Like what?
Like central banks in many developed nations. They are fiercely independent.
Right, the Fed in the U.S. or the ECB in Europe?
Exactly. Their governors serve long, staggered terms that intentionally don't align with election cycles.
So a president can't just fire them all and put their buddies in?
Right. And they are protected from being fired just for making unpopular economic decisions.
Okay, I see.
A smart mandate system would require something like an auditor general or an office for verifiable obligations, endowed with that exact same level of untouchable independence.
And their only job would be math.
Their sole constitutional mandate would be to track the concrete indicators established in the campaign contracts and publish a fixed rhythm of completely unvarnished reports.
It's essentially a continuous real-time audit of power.
Continue.
You aren't just checking in on the government every 4 years when you go to the ballot box. You are watching a dashboard.
The dashboard analogy is actually really useful here, especially when we connect it to the text's requirement for transparency and civic control.
Right. Those are two of the practical pillars mentioned in the text.
The manifesto calls for legal mechanisms for feedback and citizen participation in monitoring.
So the citizens are looking at the dashboard too.
Everyone is. The continuous publication of data means that civic organizations, watchdogs, journalists, they can all sound the alarm the moment a key indicator veers off course.
But let me play devil's advocate here regarding this level of continuous civic control.
Please do.
Because if a government is constantly being audited, constantly defending its KPIs against these independent verifiers, and constantly dealing with legal feedback from citizen watchdogs,
It sounds exhausting.
doesn't that risk just grinding the actual machinery of state to a halt?
That's a common fear.
I mean, if every minor bureaucratic decision is subject to a public audit of its evidence-based model, nothing will ever get built. No policy will ever be agile enough to work in the real world.
But that assumes the smart mandate applies to the micromanagement of the state, which is a misinterpretation of the text.
Oh, it doesn't.
No, the text specifies key obligations. The mandate is the macro-level contract.
Okay, explain the difference.
Well, think of it like hiring a CEO.
Okay.
If you hire a CEO to increase your company's market share by 20%,
Yeah.
you don't audit what kind of coffee they buy for the break room.
Right.
You audit the quarterly earnings, the overall trajectory. The smart mandate provides the boundary conditions.
The picture.
Yes. The politician has the operational freedom to maneuver within those boundaries. They can buy whatever coffee they want.
I see.
The friction, the auditing, and the civic pushback only become acute when the politician approaches the edges of the mandate.
When they are actively failing.
Exactly. When the data suggests they are failing to meet the core, verifiable obligations they swore to achieve.
So the agility remains, but it is tethered to reality.
Tethered to the data.
And this concept of a tether leads us to what is perhaps the most profound philosophical shift in the entire manifesto.
This is my favorite part of item 24.
It's huge. It's the moment the text literally redefines what a politician actually is.
The fiduciary responsibility.
Yes. Item 24 states that power carries a fiduciary responsibility. The politician is explicitly categorized as a trustee.
A trustee.
And they are obligated to act in the interests of the life and safety of the trusters, meaning the citizens.
To truly grasp the weight of this, we really need to unpack the legal definition of a fiduciary.
Yeah, because that is a very heavy legal and financial term.
It is. In law and finance, a fiduciary duty is the absolute highest standard of care recognized by the legal system.
The highest.
It is not just an expectation of competence. It is a legally binding obligation of unyielding loyalty and care.
So it's more than just doing a good job.
Much more. If you are a fiduciary like, let's say, an attorney to a client or a corporate board member to the shareholders.
You're a wealth manager.
Right. You are legally barred from putting your own interests or the interests of a third party above the interests of the truster.
So if a wealth manager takes your retirement fund
Right.
and invests it in their brother-in-law's failing restaurant, just to save him from bankruptcy.
They haven't just made a bad investment.
No. They have breached their fiduciary duty. They have engaged in self-dealing.
And the penalty isn't just getting a bad performance review or losing the client.
They are stripped of their licenses, sued for restitution, and they often face actual criminal prosecution.
Exactly. The legal system recognizes that when there is a massive asymmetry of power and knowledge between two parties, the party with the power must be heavily restricted.
And heavily punished if they abuse it.
Right. Now, take that standard and apply it to statecraft.
Which is mind-blowing because historically the relationship between the state and the citizen has been viewed through the lens of sovereignty.
The sovereign ruler and the subject.
Right. The state possesses authority. And while democratic states derive that authority from the consent of the governed, the leaders acting on behalf of the state are heavily shielded.
Very shielded. By doctrines like sovereign immunity or executive privilege.
So if a prime minister implements a sweeping economic policy that benefits their major campaign donors,
but completely impoverishes the middle class.
Exactly. Under our current system, it is decried as corrupt or unfair.
Sure, people get mad on the news.
But it is rarely prosecuted as a literal crime. It's treated as a political issue to be resolved at the next ballot box.
The Manifesto completely changes that classification. By labeling the politician a fiduciary, it strips away that mystical aura of sovereignty.
They are no longer a sovereign. They are a manager.
They are just trustees managing an incredibly large account. And the text actually goes further. It defines the specific nature of the trust.
Right. It isn't just about managing tax dollars.
No. The fiduciary obligation is specifically tied to the life and safety of the citizens.
The life and safety. That phrase is the anchor of the whole thing.
It elevates political malpractice from just a purely economic issue to an existential one.
It makes me think of the medical profession, honestly.
How so?
Well, a doctor is a fiduciary of health. They are bound by the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm.
Right.
If a surgeon ignores peer-reviewed medical data, uses some unverified experimental technique purely because, say, a pharmaceutical rep paid them off.
Or just because it's faster.
Yeah, and the patient dies.
Yeah.
That surgeon is charged with medical malpractice. They breached their duty of care.
They go to jail.
So the inevitable question here is, what does political malpractice look like under the rules of Item 24?
Well, political malpractice would be any action taken by a leader that demonstrably ignores verifiable data.
Okay.
Relies on invalidated models, or serves personal or factional interests at the direct expense of the life and safety of the public.
Give me a concrete example of how that would play out.
Let's consider a scenario regarding environmental regulations. Suppose scientific consensus and independent verifiable models clearly show that a specific chemical byproduct from a massive factory is contaminating a city's water supply.
Okay, so the water is toxic.
And it's leading to severe, measurable health outcomes. Cancer spikes, things like that. The data is absolutely clear.
But the factory is owned by a massive political donor.
Classic scenario. Now, under a free mandate, the politician might use vague slogans about protecting local jobs or cutting job-killing red tape to justify keeping the factory open.
They just balance the political calculation of losing donor money against the public outcry.
And they usually choose the donor money.
Right.
But under the SMART mandate, the politician's primary unyielding legal obligation is the life and safety of the citizens. The verifiable data shows a direct threat to life.
So they have to shut it down.
If the politician ignores that data to appease a donor, they're not just making a cynical political calculation.
They are committing an explicit breach of their fiduciary duty.
They've committed political malpractice. They can be held personally and legally liable for the illnesses caused by that water.
Wow. But let me push back again, because I want to look at the potential chilling effect this might have.
Okay, let's look at the downsides.
If I'm a leader facing a completely novel crisis, say a brand new pathogen is sweeping the globe.
A new pandemic.
Right. The data is incomplete because the virus is new. The models are flawed because the situation is unprecedented.
Naturally.
Every single choice I make is going to risk some aspect of the citizens' life and safety.
Yes.
If I shut down the economy, people lose their livelihoods, leading to despair, poverty, and downstream health effects.
But if you keep it open, the virus spreads and overwhelms the hospital.
Exactly. So if I am terrified of being prosecuted for political malpractice, I might just freeze.
Paralyzed by liability.
Right. I might refuse to make any decision at all, waiting for perfect data that will literally never arrive. Doesn't this fiduciary framework breed incredibly cowardly leaders who refuse to act in a crisis?
It's a very valid concern. But the legal concept of fiduciary duty already accounts for this. It's called the business judgment rule.
The business judgment rule.
Yes.
Yeah.
A fiduciary is not expected to be clairvoyant. They are not punished simply because an outcome was bad.
Okay, so what are they punished for?
They are punished if the process by which they arrived at their decision was negligent, self-serving, or reckless.
Ah, the process.
Right. In your pandemic scenario, a leader acting as a fiduciary wouldn't be paralyzed. They would be legally required to gather the best available evidence at that moment.
Consult the independent verifying bodies.
Exactly. Make their reasoning public and act transparently based on the minimization of harm.
And if they do all that and the outcome is still tragic,
They haven't breached their duty. The breach occurs when they actively suppress data.
like hiding infection rates.
Exactly. Or when they ignore the medical experts to protect their polling numbers. Or if they exploit the crisis to give no-bid contracts to their friends.
So the SMART mandate doesn't punish the tragedy of leadership. It punishes the negligence of leadership.
Beautifully put, yes.
And it ensures that the negligence is actually felt by the person who committed it.
Which seamlessly transitions into the next critical component of item 24.
Yes. Because the text doesn't just establish these rules, it establishes the personal stakes for breaking them.
It introduces the principle of skin in the game and the symmetry of risk.
Let me read the exact wording, because it is vital, the text states. Decision makers are obligated to share the consequences of their decisions, institutionally, politically, and reputationally, rather than shifting the price of mistakes onto others.
It's such a radical departure from reality.
Because to understand the magnitude of this demand, you have to look at the massive systemic asymmetry of risk that defines global politics today.
The people at the top never pay the price.
Never. Let's take a macroeconomic example. A central government decides to implement a radical economic shock therapy.
Okay.
They drastically cut public services, deregulate financial markets, slash interest rates, promising it will trigger an economic golden age.
The classic trickle-down dream.
But they don't use verified models. They use ideological slogans.
Right.
And the policy fails catastrophically. Inflation skyrockets to 20%. Small businesses are wiped out. Foreclosures sweep the nation.
A total disaster.
The everyday citizens, the trusters, under our new definition, they bear the entirety of the risk. They lose their homes, their savings, their health.
And what happens to the architects of that policy? The politicians?
Oh, they usually just resign in disgrace, which sounds like a punishment, but it isn't.
Not at all.
They resign, they retreat to a multi-million-dollar estate, they take a position at a prestigious think tank.
They join a few corporate boards.
Right. And then they write a best-selling memoir explaining why the policy was actually brilliant, but the public just wasn't ready for it.
It's infuriating.
They experience absolutely zero downside risk to their material well-being, while the people they governed are financially ruined.
And that is exactly the asymmetry item 24 seeks to destroy.
Skin in the game.
Yeah, skin in the game is a concept heavily popularized by the author Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Right, the black swan guy.
Exactly. The premise is really simple. Systems learn and evolve through failure, but only if the people making the decisions are actually exposed to the consequences of that failure.
Like a pilot.
Exactly. If a pilot flies recklessly, they don't just crash the plane, they go down with it.
Therefore, pilots are heavily incentivized not to fly recklessly.
Politicians currently are pilots who are allowed to parachute out of the plane the moment they put it into a nosedive.
That is a terrifying analogy, but it's so accurate. I actually love the historical analogy of the ancient Roman arches.
Oh, I know this one. Tell it.
So when a Roman engineer designed and oversaw the construction of a stone arch bridge,
Right.
the final and most dangerous step was removing the wooden scaffolding that held all the stones in place while the mortar set.
Because if the math was wrong, the whole thing comes down.
Exactly. And according to legend, the engineer who designed the bridge was required by law to stand directly underneath the arch while the scaffolding was knocked away.
It is just the absolute ultimate alignment of incentives.
It really is. If you cut corners on the materials, if your mathematical models were flawed, if you prioritized speed over safety.
You were the very first person to be crushed by your own negligence.
It really focuses the mind, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
You aren't just signing a piece of paper. Your life is literally tied to the integrity of your work. The manifesto is essentially asking us, how do we put the politician under the bridge?
Right. The text mentions sharing consequences institutionally, politically, and reputationally.
Notice it doesn't explicitly mention financial ruin or, like, physical punishment.
No, it's not a barbaric document, but it heavily implies a severe stripping of privilege. Let's explore how we could actually translate this into modern legal architecture.
Okay, let's build the system.
If a politician enacts a policy that demonstrably violates their SMART mandate, and it results in a severe degradation of the citizens' well-being.
The water is poisoned, the economy tanks.
Right. The reputational and political consequences must be codified in law, not just left to the whims of public opinion or the next election cycle.
So we aren't just talking about losing the next election.
Far from it. A true symmetry of risk might involve a permanent, lifetime ban from ever holding public office again at any level.
Just completely exiled from politics.
Exactly. It could involve the revocation of state-funded pensions.
Ooh, hitting them in the wallet.
It could even extend into the private sector. If a politician breaches their fiduciary duty, perhaps they're legally barred from ever acting as a lobbyist.
Oh, that would terrify them.
Or barred from serving on the board of any publicly traded company.
That is massive.
The goal is to make the cost of breaking the mandate so high that the politician's self-interest aligns perfectly with the public interest.
Because right now, their self-interest aligns with the donors.
Exactly. If they break the trust under this new system, their career as a person of influence is entirely over.
You know, you could even explore institutional consequences for the political parties themselves.
Oh, expanding the blast radius.
Yeah, because parties are complicit. If a ruling party pushes through legislation without a verifiable model and it causes a measurable public crisis,
the party takes a hit.
the party itself could lose access to public campaign funding for the next decade.
That would change party discipline overnight.
Wouldn't it? If the institution has to pay the price, the institution will police its own members much more ruthlessly.
The party whips wouldn't be forcing members to vote for the leader's bad idea.
No, they would be begging the leader to drop the bad idea so the party doesn't go bankrupt.
That level of systemic alignment is exactly what the text is driving at. But none of this, not the fiduciary duty, not the evidence-based policy, not the skin in the game, none of it means anything without an enforcement mechanism.
Right. A contract without a penalty clause is basically just a suggestion.
Just a piece of paper. Which brings us to the final and definitely the most aggressive pillars of item 24.
The ultimate sanction.
Yes.
The text lays out the legal consequences. It says, violating key obligations triggers a legally provided procedure for recall or sanctions. Let's hover over that word for a second. Recall.
It's the big red button.
It is, because under the current free mandate system, if a politician completely betrays their platform on day one of a 4-year term,
The citizens basically have to endure 3 years and 364 days of betrayal before they can do anything about it.
right. I mean, sure, impeachment exists, but impeachment is usually reserved for egregious, explicit crimes.
Like treason or bribery.
Right. Not for breaking campaign promises.
The SMART mandate mainstreams the recall procedure.
It normalizes firing the boss.
Exactly. Because the campaign program is a legal contract, a verified breach of the key points nullifies the mandate.
Nullifies it.
Yes. The politician didn't just break a promise. They broke the actual conditions under which they were granted power in the first place.
So the legal justification for their authority just evaporates.
Exactly. The independent verifiers, our hypothetical Office of Verifiable Obligations, would issue a report demonstrating the breach.
The math proves they failed.
And this report would act as the trigger, initiating an immediate legal procedure to remove the leader from power and return the mandate to the electorate.
A snap election.
Essentially, yes.
But the text singles out one specific breach as the supreme violation. One red line that stands above all others.
This is where it gets really intense.
It is. And this is where the manifesto's focus on a peaceful world truly crystallizes. The text says that a recall is triggered, quote, especially the beginning of a war, contrary to promises of peace and/or without direct legitimation, where required by democratic procedures, end quote.
This clause attempts to solve arguably one of the most dangerous flaws in modern statecraft.
The unchecked power of the executive branch to initiate violence.
Yes. Over the last century, in many democracies, we have seen a slow, steady, almost invisible concentration of war powers into the hands of a single leader.
The president or the prime minister.
Right. Legislatures, which are supposed to debate and authorize the use of force, often just abdicate that responsibility.
Because it's politically risky to vote for a war.
Exactly. They prefer to let the executives take the political risk. The result is that a single person, often surrounded by a really small echo chamber of advisors.
Can commit an entire nation to a catastrophic conflict.
And they act on what they call executive privilege or their authority as commander-in-chief.
They justify it by saying they have access to classified intelligence that the public cannot see.
Trust my vision. Trust the unverified model.
It all comes back to the bridge analogy.
It does. And this is where the asymmetry of risk is at its absolute most grotesque.
I mean, when a leader initiates a war, they do not stand on the front lines.
No, they do not face enemy fire.
Their children are rarely, if ever, drafted.
The cost of the war in blood, in generational trauma, in diverted resources, in destroyed infrastructure, is borne entirely by the trusters.
The citizens.
The citizens die. The citizens pay the taxes to fund the munitions, while the leader exercises their free mandate from a highly secure bunker.
Item 24 looks at that dynamic and says, absolutely not.
Never again.
If a leader runs on a platform of peace, and honestly, practically every leader does, because nobody gets elected by promising endless agonizing conflict,
Right.
and then they initiate a war, they have committed the ultimate breach of their fiduciary duty to protect life and safety.
Unless they achieve direct legitimation.
Right. That phrase is in the text. What does that mean?
This phrase is vital. It means that the leader cannot use executive loopholes to bypass the public will.
So if a situation arises where the leader truly believes that military force is the only option left to protect the nation,
They cannot act unilaterally.
so how do we interpret direct legitimation? Is the text implying like a literal national referendum before troops can be deployed?
It leaves the exact mechanism to the specific democratic procedures of the state. But the principle is incredibly clear. The barrier to entry for war must be astronomically high.
And directly tied to the consent of the people who will actually bleed for it.
Exactly. A simple executive order is totally invalid.
Wow.
Even a rubber stamp vote from a compliant, cowardly legislature might be considered invalid under a strict wording of the SMART mandate if it contradicts the core verifiable obligations of peace.
So what does the leader have to do?
The leader must present the evidence, the verifiable models of the threat, directly to the public and explicitly ask for the mandate to use force.
They have to show the math for war.
Yes.
It is a legal leash on the dogs of war.
Yeah.
I want you, listening to this right now, to just apply this framework to the major conflicts of the last 50 years.
Oh, it changes everything.
Just think about the wars initiated under the guise of, preemptive defense, based on intelligence models that were hidden from the public and later proven to be completely flawed.
Or fabricated entirely.
Exactly. If a SMART mandate had been in place, if the leaders knew that initiating those conflicts without direct, verified public legitimation would instantly trigger a legal recall procedure,
Strip them of their power.
expose them to personal criminal liability for breaching their fiduciary duty, how many of those wars would have actually happened?
Probably very few. It entirely changes the calculus of power.
It does.
When a leader can initiate a conflict using the lives of others with absolutely zero downside risk to themselves, war just remains a viable tool for political maneuvering,
For distraction.
for ideological crusades. But the moment you engineer symmetry of risk,
The moment you put the politician under the bridge.
the moment the leader knows that a fraudulent war will result in their own institutional, reputational, and legal ruin, the threshold for initiating violence shifts from convenient to absolutely unavoidable.
That is just, it's the profound ambition of this text.
It's massive.
It isn't just about making government, a little more efficient. It is about engineering a system where the catastrophic misuse of power is personally devastating to the person holding the power. We've covered an immense amount of philosophical and structural ground today. Let's kind of synthesize the journey we've taken through item 24.
Good idea.
We started by diagnosing the disease of modern politics, the era of promises without obligations, where campaigns are basically just high-budget marketing exercises.
Selling slogans.
And we explored the proposed cure, the SMART mandate,
A system that transforms rhetorical campaigns into binding legal contracts.
demanding that vague slogans be replaced by concrete indicators and verifiable models.
And we unpack the paradigm shift of evidence-based policy and the continuous public audit of power through independent verification.
We redefined the politician. We stripped away that aura of sovereign leadership and replaced it with the heavy, binding legal obligations of a fiduciary.
A trustee legally bound to protect the life and safety of the citizens above all else.
We examined the absolute necessity of skin in the game, the requirement that risk must be symmetrical.
Leaders must stand under the bridge they build.
facing the institutional and reputational consequences of their failures, preventing them from shifting the cost of their mistakes onto the public.
And finally, we confronted the ultimate teeth of the mandate, the recall procedure and legal sanctions.
The assertion that breaking the contract means losing the power, especially regarding the absolute red line of initiating an illegitimate war.
It is a breathtakingly cohesive vision of accountability.
It really is. It treats the state not as a theater for charisma, but as a highly regulated, mathematically sound engine for preserving life and prosperity.
It demands maturity from both the leaders and the electorate.
That's a good point.
It asks us to stop looking for saviors and start acting like diligent shareholders managing a critical asset.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought experiment to mull over.
Okay.
If we actually manage to implement this architecture tomorrow,
Okay, hypothetically.
if running for office meant signing a binding legal contract with severe personal, financial, and reputational liabilities for failure,
Right.
how would that alter the very DNA of the people who seek power?
Oh, the applicant pool would change entirely.
Right. Would the charismatic ideologues, the fiery orators, and the political showmen just vanish?
Terrified of the liability.
Exactly. And if they do, does that mean our future leaders will exclusively be like cautious data scientists, meticulous actuaries, and risk-averse project managers?
It forces us to ask what kind of personality is truly willing to take on absolute personal liability for the management of millions of lives.
And ultimately, is a government run entirely by cautious, legally bound managers exactly the utopia we've been waiting for?
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Or deep down, do we secretly crave the emotional theater and the grand, unaccountable visions that the smart mandate is trying to destroy? We all want the bridge to be structurally sound. But when it comes to the messy, fundamentally human endeavor of politics, are we truly ready to read, sign, and enforce the terms of service?
That is the million-dollar question.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We love taking these dense, radical frameworks and stress testing them with you. True learning happens when we take the systems we've accepted as normal and realize they are just choices, and that we have the power to make different ones. Keep questioning the architecture, keep demanding the data, and we will see you on the next deep dive.